Welcome back. I'm Wave Punk, and this is day 206 of producing for a year. And today is super special because I got the privilege of sitting down with longtime dubstep legend and bass music label DPMO's founder, FuntCase. FuntCase is someone I met through Rocket League. He was a big Rocket League fan. He actually showed up in my chat when I was streaming back in like 2018. I didn't even know who he was. But over the years of gaming and talking about music, he and I have formed a relationship, and he's someone I have the privilege of calling friend. And he was more than excited. He was enthusiastic to sit down and record a video with me where I just talk with him about anything that comes to mind. We start with talking about basses and making music, making basses wide, and then move on to just generalist questions, including really dumb things like how do EQs work and what makes one EQ different than another. So I've got some timestamps down below. You can kind of skip around, see the things you enjoyed, or maybe just lock in and enjoy it. The audio wasn't the best. I found that out afterwards, but I did my best to compensate for it in post. Anyways, I'll stop stalling. I hope you guys enjoy the video. I've been trying to deal with like stereo width fair, like how to make basses wide without making them too wide. I do a lot of looking at the goniometer, and then I've been pulling in like this is a track from Vengeant, and he has this like wonderful little bit where he shows the bass by itself, and so I was like looking at his, looks like a fucking diamond, and like mine were so like these little lines like where it wasn't wide at all.
That's your one, yeah. Say that one. So, but you see at the top there above 10K, that's an insane amount of top end. That's like not a good amount of top end.
Okay.
So if anything, it's aesthetic because yours is more balanced and more warm.
Okay.
His sounds more like it's got more clarity just because it's more aggressive in the top end. It's got more of a high end characteristic, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's got more clarity. Just because yours has got more low end in it.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
It's just a balancing thing. That's all that is.
Okay. I was like listening to his stuff, and I found this on TikTok, and I pulled it up and was like, wow, this sounds so much better than the stuff I'm making. And then I pulled it in here and started looking at it in Span and was like, well, hang on now, that doesn't look right. And then would go and like listen to his bass, and his kick is just getting lost. And it was one of those like good lessons of like, as long as it actually sounds good at the end, who the fuck cares?
Effectively, that's the case. Yeah, I mean, you can sit and do the whole thing about, oh, it shouldn't be above zero and it shouldn't be doing this and that.
Yeah,
we're kind of beyond that era now because we have a lot of sound engines these days that can cope with it a bit better than the old ones used to. So a lot of that sticking to certain rules mattered more in the older days. Skrillex has kind of blown that whole thing out of the water, honestly, like, because there was a project file that he had leaked, and literally everything was slammed, but his mix was amazing. So at the moment, it's kind of flipped the script a little bit. So it's not as it doesn't aggressively need to be set all quiet, and certain things don't need to be certain ways. The overriding factor is does it sound good? That's kind of the main point. And I think we should always really concentrate more on how the track sounds over how it's polished.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Make sure you're not polishing a turd, you know? Make sure it's not a turd in the first place. You know
yeah. No, it's funny. I made this session, and I literally titled it the Wide Bass Research Facility. I was like, I'm just trying to like figure out how to make the sounds I want to make. But and a few times I've been like, well, that's a really cool sound. And I'm like, yeah, but it kind of sounds like crap. Like I would never listen to this. So like the music of it, the sound design was good, but the musicality of it was bad, you know?
Yeah.
When you listen to this, what's the first thing that jumps out to you? Like when you listen to this groove?
Where is the sub hitting? Is the sub in that instrument one, or is that in a separate channel altogether?
Yeah, no, this is just for this bass, it's just that one sound.
Is there a sub bass like as well?
No.
What I would do is I would copy that channel and have that synth be just that sub channel on the third one.
Okay.
Then you can manipulate that, because what you want to do is, what I like to do is have a separate sub, because you can add harmonics into subs. So like when you're using something like Massive, you get a square wave and you turn the intensity to nothing, and then crank all the way to square wave, and then as you open up the intensity, it adds low harmonics in sort of like the 100 to 300 sort of category.
Okay.
You get the thickness you get the thick weight of the sub, and then you get more harmonics from the low end, which adds to the mix itself.
So to make sure, I want to see if I think I'm tracking, because this wave I'm using is a sine to saw, right? And so like initially it's here, but I moved it to like here specifically to like bring in those extra partials to make it a little bit thick. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, to an extent, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't use Vital that often, but it's a similar process. But what I would do personally is I would take that sine to saw thing, I would make an entirely new channel.
Okay.
I would use the sine to saw on its own, so you can manipulate and check the harmonics on that on its own, and then have the rest of it like that bass the bass noise you've been trying to get quite wide. I'd have that up to about maybe 250s, that sort of region.
Okay, cool.
And then you'll get that aesthetic of having the same sort of like bright and like clear characteristic as the other one does, even though that's actually way too aggressive in the top end.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find it better to have a separate sub and work with it. Some people like to mix it in with a synth, but I like to have it separate, honestly.
Okay. Do you have any tips on how to glue different bass sounds together?
It depends on what you mean by glue different sounds. So are you saying that you want also for instance, all the bass sounds you've got in this, do you want them to sound more seamless and more together?
Yeah, like so like these three.
Yeah, so for instance, what you're hearing in terms of the difference is that first bass you've got, the one you've made that's quite wide. That's got it's got an essence of white noise in it because it's going as it plays. So when that down comes in, there's no white noise. So it's almost like you're losing like a huge portion of the top end, essentially. So that's why you're hearing like the clarity from your bass that you've kind of set up and balanced well doesn't sit with that one because aesthetically it's not in the same region of what's supposed to be playing in the balance.
Okay.
So you'll have your low end, your low mids, and your mids, but your top end is lacking because it's more of a sort of like scooped sound. So your EQ would be like flat, and then it would start rolling off because you haven't got that white noise element matching that noise. See what I mean?
Yeah.
You can see it straight away. There's all that whooshiness from the top, and then as soon as that bow comes in, it just disappears completely over like 6K.
So obviously the idea behind having different basses is to have them sound different, but you want the shape to be like similar so that it doesn't sound as dramatic of a change?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to achieve in the song itself, because obviously there's songs that will switch into different types. So you can have something that's loud and then switch into something that's more minimal, and you're trying to achieve that sound. But if you're trying to achieve something a lot more seamless, so you want that sound to sound more like that one, you're going to have to try and match what you're looking at on the analyzer. So for instance, you're going to need stuff like white noise, maybe even distort it. It might be cleaner than the one you're doing, because the one you're doing is quite aggressive. It sounds a bit more squeezed, maybe compressed, and that one's a bit more like and doesn't really sit in the same sort of energy level as your original one. So you've got to try and achieve what you're trying to achieve with the first one, by maybe distorting it, adding white noise, or boosting the tops between like maybe, I don't know, I'd say 6K to 10K, and then smooth it off at 7K, because 7K is a ripper on the ears.
Interesting. Some of my favorite tracks I've heard, some of the sounds are in big spacious rooms, and other sounds are like no reverb at all, very up the middle, and like the going back and forth between them is a really cool sound. But every time I try to pull that off myself, it just sounds messy.
I can't lie, it's a difficult trait to have, because your drums will reflect a lot of what the characteristic of the track's going to be in general. So if your drums are pulling a lot more of the work of what the track needs, because right now what I can hear is that your drums are probably less forefront than most DnB tracks would be. So you're allowing your synths to be more forefront. In that way, you want your synths to be carrying the energy. So if there's a difference in, like for instance, that first one again, like I say, being a lot more whooshy in the tops and being more aggressive, and then it goes down, it's going to lose the energy because that's what's carrying the vibe. But if you're doing DnB is a lot about the drums being the forefront. So if the drums are carrying the entire tune, and then you've got basses doing different vibes, the drums will still continuously carry the energy, and then the basses will change. So it'll be an aesthetic change. It won't be like an instant dip in like energy and that sort of stuff. So
right. Okay.
It depends on what part of your song is going to dictate the energy, really.
I'm curious, if I turn the sidechain compression for the basses back on, do you feel like be brutally honest, do you feel like this is enough of the drums being in the forefront for the style and like what you associate with drum and bass?
How much are you dipping it by?
So I'm using Shaper Box, and I'm just doing this, like it's fully, for the kick it's going all the way down, for the snare it's not going, it's going like 60%.
Does it say -6? So you're doing about -3 to 4 on the snare. Honestly, you could probably do -6 on the snare and still wouldn't be able to hear it.
Really?
Quite honestly, because it's quite a quick comeback, where it comes back into the song. You really don't need it to be that long. Like I would even say, like grab the second, when it hits the sidechain and comes back up again. I would say shorten that, because you only need it to be snappy. It only really needs to be snappy.
Like make it more like this.
Yeah, exactly. So that first one you drag down, put that to like -6, which is like the middle line, and then like do that on both. But you don't. drum and bass drums are very snappy and very quick transient wise. So
Yeah.
you don't really need a long sidechain. But kicks are slightly different. If you've got a kick, I don't remember how your kick sounds, but I think if it's got quite a long tail, you don't want that to cut into the sub and start making it phase and do all these crazy things. So that's where you would normally have a longer release on that sort of type of sidechain.
Yeah, the kick is like, which we can.
So you see, your kick one simple is instant, but your second one has a tail.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on if they're both not EQ'd and they're both making a boom sound, you'll need the longer release. But if you were to take that longer kick below the simple kick, and you were to like EQ out the low end from it, so that you allow the kick one to be the main boom of it, it's then going to be a lot snappier. So you're still going to get that tail and the feel of it. You're not going to get the weight from the long tail, so you don't need to sidechain just as long.
So we're gonna do like.
DnB is like super snappy drums. Basically.
Yeah, I saw a tip the other day that was like, if you don't have two sounds happening at the same time, mixing becomes a lot simpler. And I was like, that does sound like the drum and bass music I know, where it's like, yeah, it's like the drums are happening alone, and then the bass is coming in right after it.
Yeah. That's the thing as well. Is like, and you listen to a lot of artists like, let's say Dimension or Subfocus or Metrik or anyone like that. A lot of their tracks have two different spectrums of sounds going on at the same time. So they'll have one sound which is like a square going dum 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 dum, dum, which is sort of tapping around the 200 to 500k mark.
Okay.
And then they'll have like a high Reese noise, which is going or doing all that stuff. But that's sitting between like 2 and 10k. So they have their own specific ranges for them to sit in. But if you're doing basses that have the same characteristics in the EQ and you're playing them twice over each other and they're very close to each other, you're effectively doubling the frequency. And that's why it becomes harder to mix, because then you're trying to find spaces for them to fit in the thing, but they're doing the exact same thing. So that's where you got to try and find the mix for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So back with this kick thing. This is the one with the tail.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that kick one simple is like, it's got a good thump to it. So
yeah.
So honestly, like, if you feel like that kick one simple isn't quite thumpy enough, you can still make that thumpy, and it won't be affecting anything else, because the longer kick is gone now in terms of the low end. It won't mess that kick up at all.
I feel like it don't even need to layer kicks. Like, I don't know, I don't know. I feel like I get like I start to play it and I'm like, this sounds good, and then I put it in the mix and I'm like, it's not good enough. So then my answer is more, like, put more kicks instead of just like fine tuning the one that is there already.
Yeah. It's better to replace or refine. If you're going to add, then you start doing exactly what you were talking about, which is you just start trying to find places for them to sit. And that becomes a whole different ballgame of work to put on yourself.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't think I had. I'm very open to any thoughts you have on the stuff you've heard from me and things that you think I like, big principles to work on.
Do you have a certain like artist that you listen to that you're trying to aim for in terms of their sound or their energy or mix or anything like that you're?
I've been doing a lot of looking at Metrik's music, and it's been super helpful that he's got like full like hour and a half tutorials of like, let me just walk through the entire session out there on YouTube. Those have been so helpful.
Metrik I met him for the first time a long time ago when we played a festival in Germany together, and that dude, after I just discovered him, I was like, this guy is different. His drums are unbelievable. One thing I noticed about Metrik drums is pick and snare, very, very instant, very, very quick. And then you'll have a long tail clap on the end of it or something like that, which then sort of almost glues the drums together. Rather than it feel like it's like stop-starty, you've got these elements which are actually keeping the energy in the track. So that's why I was saying, like, if you were to do your drums on here, I would remove the low end from the tail and keep the snappiness of the kick, because the snare is also quite snappy. So you're kind of getting that Metrik sound in that way.
Yeah.
Kind of right like that. So.
That makes sense. So yeah, like having things that ring out, but only in the high end, not in the lows. In a number of his videos that was confusing to me was he would put reverb on the drums. He'd be like, I want them to like sit in a room. I want them to be in a space. And I'm like, conceptually that makes sense to me. But like with everything we've said, we want the drums to be really snappy. How do you put reverb on drums and have them not get washy and muddy?
Well, because you have certain elements of a reverb which you can tweak up to change the characteristics. So you can have anything from changing the size from it to being sounding like it's almost instant, to being in a bathroom, to being in a bedroom, to being in a concert,
right?
That sort of thing. But when you change the characteristic, you can have it quite short, and then also you can have EQs on inside of reverbs, which can chop out pretty much everything up to like, I guess, 3 to 5k. And then you're kind of allowing the washiness of the drums as a collective to be doing all the reverbing. And then I would personally put reverbs on things like snares.
Right.
but not the low end of the snare.
Right.
Above the main punch of the snare, you would put the reverb, but not too much reverb. It has to be very, very quite simple, very short, but just enough for it to kind of glue the drums together. You could put the drums in a bus and then reverb all that together and kind of get a feel for it, or you can do it separately. It kind of depends.
That's what like this is for, I think, right? This is like,
I would assume so, yeah.
I think this is a high pass, right? So you're cutting out the low end.
Exactly, yeah. So you're only getting reverb over 1K there. So
right.
I would say move that to like, I mean, it depends on what you put it on. If you put it onto an entire drums bus, you could allow 400 to 500 hertz upwards. Honestly, because it depends on what key the snare is, but the snare will hit typically around 180 hertz to 210.
Okay.
Most of these snares, but you don't really want to reverb the kind of low thump of it, because that's where it gets a bit weird.
Yeah. Which it's so funny. Like as I was asking the question, I was like, well, you just said like put like a high clap just on the high end, which is sort of functioning as a reverb. Like it's a tail, it's a space like that. Exactly. So conceptually, it all makes sense to put it together like that. So
yeah.
Cool.
And also when you think about drums as a general as well, is all drum kits have reverb. There's no drum kit which is dry.
Right.
Even in a driest room ever, you'll still have some kind of reverb.
Yeah.
It's always going to be, unless they're in what is it called, an anti-echoic chamber or something.
Yeah. Anechoic chamber or something like that. Yeah. Some weird.
Exactly. Yeah. What also is a good preset if you want to start on something quite simple is if you get reverbs that have overheads presets. Those are the mics that set up the general sound of a set of drums and take that sort of element. So you could take a preset for overheads on live drums and then tune that with a very small amount of like wet on the mix and see how that fits on your drum set.
Okay.
Because that's only really effectively taking probably, I'd say, the hats and the cymbals and maybe some rim shots in terms of the reverb crossover. Yeah. So that might be a good starting point for you to work on and just tweak it from there.
It's hitting the high spectrum stuff.
Yeah,
exactly. Totally. Well, that's super helpful then. I really appreciate you giving me some listens there. I literally last night made this. I've been like trying to figure out how to get like I was really proud of myself because I was listening to Vengeance Sound here with both of these meters up, and I was doing the like, okay, so he's mono down here. Okay, then it starts to get crazy. And then like it gets up to here and like it's a fucking wild star. And then I finally, for the first time, like last night at like 1 a.m., made this bass that actually like did the same thing. And I was really proud of myself for like getting to be like the same sort of spectrum sweep. I was like, let's go! It looks the same, you know.
There's a very quick way of doing that as well. There's a free thing on xfer.com, the guys who make Serum. They do a dimension expander, which is the same one as they use in Massive.
Okay.
It's a free plugin. Basically, what you do is you'll spread the shit out of the whatever you're doing, and then tweak it so you like the width. And obviously, all the lows will be in it as well because they don't have any kind of crossover in it. But what you would do is you would take something like FabFilter Pro Q3.
Yeah.
You can actually EQ out the sides. And you can have a long tail on it, which means it would do the exact same thing you're doing, which is mono, slightly bring it in, and eventually it becomes really wide.
Okay.
So that's a very quick way of doing it.
Fascinating. What was it called?
Dimension Expander is
Dimension
the stereo imager.
Yeah.
And then that's free, and then there's FabFilter Pro Q3, which is my absolute mega go-to for EQing.
Okay.
It's incredible. If you end up getting it, or you end up want to trying it, get the demo, and I'll teach you how to use it. It's fucking insane.
Okay. I don't understand what makes one EQ better than another. Like, I feel like they're all the same, right? Tell me that I'm wrong. I know I'm wrong. Just tell me what I'm wrong.
Well, some EQs are linear and some are phased. So you get different types of EQing depending on the thing, and also some EQs work better in different images as well compared to others. Some will do like phase EQing instead of in the mono instead of like the regular linear EQing, which is regular. But phase EQing is much more sonically accurate.
Okay.
Call it that way.
Yeah.
Someone like Noisia does a lot of phase EQing and that sort of stuff, linear phase EQing. So yeah, it can be a whole different thing. But FabFilter Pro Q, you can do a thing called live dynamic EQing, and what it will do is, have you ever used Soothe?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. I don't have any tool that does it.
Yeah.
But
So what you would do is you would find an EQ spot, and you would drag down the thing to say where you want it to maximum hit, dip, or up or down.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, I don't know, your song's sounding great. There's just a little bit more punch in the snare, which you want from, say, the master, and you put it on 200 hertz and you boost it. Instead of just boosting it and it does all the hertz, you're gonna set the threshold of the dynamic EQ to do it, and then set the threshold of where the peak of the snare is gonna sit in the mix, and then as soon as the snare hits, the EQ will go.
Yeah.
And so it sits like this until it does this little, like every time the snare hits, it does this, which means it's dynamically boosting that exact frequency when you tell it to.
Yeah.
which means you're getting much more accurate stuff. So I'll do a lot of my scalpel EQing. I'll do a lot of mastering in my EQ chain with that as well, because sometimes you don't want to lose the characteristic of that exact frequency, but you want it to kind of clean out when certain elements hit.
Okay.
So you can either do it in the channel, or you can be lazy and do it in the EQ on the master. It's just an amazing piece of kit, honestly.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I'll go grab that one too.
And mid-side EQing is cracked.
Yeah, they do have mid-side EQing with these tools, but like it's the fundamental like basic thing. It's not anything dynamic at all.
Yeah,
so.
And I'm looking at this, and I think you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is it 8 dots?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, then the top one and low end are like cuts. They're not.
Yeah. So Fab Photo Pro Q, you could have 5 billion dots. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So yeah, there's no like multiple layer EQing, because you still need to do more to it. You can kind of just go ham on it.
Okay, I do have one stupid question I thought of. Multiband compression. I understand that, like, okay, it's literally just compression, but a little bit more dynamic, where you're only compressing these frequencies in a way, and only compressing these frequencies in a way, right? Instead of it being just like true peak for the whole thing. So that makes sense. But I don't understand why it makes it sound so much fucking better. Like every time I just turn the like default multiband compression on in Vital, I'm like, yep, that sounds better. I'm not turning that off.
But you see what your equalizer's doing after compressor, right?
Uh-huh.
So the funny part is you're making up what you've lost in the multiband. So the multiband is scooping it, and you're
okay.
You're literally just doing exactly so.
It's like
if you were to turn that equalizer off and turn the compressor off,
Uh-huh.
you'll probably get the same sound. So it's actually brighter.
It's brighter than. Yeah, I like the.
All that's doing is boosting the lows, and it's scooping the mids, and then you're losing a little bit of that top end. And then what you're doing is that crispiness. You can see in your EQ, you're doing the exact same thing. You're returning what you've lost from the multi-compressor, and then you're making it less bright. That's exactly what you're doing. So I can see from here.
That's funny.
You said to me you don't know what it's doing. You subconsciously know what it's doing, because you've done it in the EQ.
I just undid it.
The thing the compressor's doing is it's slamming everything together and making it sound more energetic in a way. When you have it off, it sounds like everything's a bit too dynamic.
Yeah.
So basically, all that's squeezing it. It's just compressing it, basically.
Okay. It just, I guess it felt so different than when I just put like a normal compressor on there, where it's like a limiter versus a clipper, where like, I don't know, it's just like just pushing it down versus actually, this felt like it was like changing the sound, you know?
That's essentially doing two jobs. It's doing, not only is it slamming it, and then it's like flattening the signal, basically. It's getting rid of like the worst of the worst and making it sound aesthetically pleasing. So like you see by your EQ is quite, like hi-fi systems are aesthetically pleasing to listen to, because there's certain frequencies dipped. If you look on you know when you get hi-fi and you turn the presets on, like jazz and the EQ for jazz is, no joke, is this.
Yeah,
the
scoop.
mids are scooped.
Yeah,
because the scooped mids is aesthetically pleasing, because when you crank mids, they make you squint. The top end is clean, the bottom end is weighty. Your ear doesn't like the mid when it's cranked, but if you crank the tops, it's squinty left. Bottom end, you don't squint on bottom end. You're just hearing weight. So aesthetically, when you scoop something, it's always going to sound better. That's why hi-fi sound like they do.
Okay.
That's why AirPods sound like they do, or Dre Beats. They sound aesthetically pleasing because they're scooped in a certain frequency to make anything sound good. That's kind of the point of it.
Okay. Someone at one point in some tutorial I was watching was like, yeah, so we want to turn the multi-band compressor on, and like, obviously you got to have that for dubstep. And I was like, I was following a dubstep tutorial, and I was like, oh, that sounds crazy. And I went and turned the compressor on, and I was like, holy fuck, yeah, this sounds so much better.
So that compressor is so remember I told you about Dimension Expander? So the same company who makes Dimension Expander makes something called OTT, and OTT is exactly what that thing is.
Okay, yeah, no, that was, he was turning on OTT, and he was like, yeah, it's a multi-band compressor. So I was like,
Who are you watching in dubstep using OTT? 'Cause OTT is literally like the cheat code of dubstep.
Bunting, have you watched this person before?
No, never.
No, okay, wow. One friend was like, oh, I know who that is. I'm like, oh, this must be a really famous person, and it's embarrassing that I don't know who this person is, but I guess they do only have 26K followers. But yeah, they had some good, like, yeah, it was like, use this for this equals weak sub or whatever.
OTT and Dimension Expander are written by the same guys, this expert. So it's the guys who do like Theorem, they make Dimension Expander and OTT, so I would definitely strongly recommend those.
The Dimension Expander isn't the same thing as, there's this one thing that Serum has that Vital doesn't have, and it's like a hyper something. It's like the first effect on their effect chain. Yeah, that.
Hyper dimension. It's basically the same thing. It's their own version. All it is it's basically it's a Haas effect. That's all it is. It's just their own version.
It's a what effect?
Haas effect. HAAS. Pars effect is when you take the same signal and then you duplicate it and then pan it to the stereo, so then you get the effect of mono to stereo. That's what that's doing.
Oh, okay, cool. That sounds sick. No relation to the F1 team though.
No.
Okay.
No. Are you sidechaining the kick and snare like only to the sub?
I'm sidechaining all of the basses. So I have all the basses like under a bus, and then I have the sidechain compression on that bus. So all of the sounds and like all the pads as well, like on a full-blown track like this one.
One thing I love to do myself is if I've got a snare that's got an entire range inside of it, which is even encroaching on stuff like hi-hats, I would sidechain the snare to the hi-hat as well. There's also a trick. There's someone called Wilkinson. There's a DnB guy called Wilkinson who does amazing music, massive. He does a lot of using shakers and tambourines and that sort of stuff, which are typically quite aggressive in the mix.
Yeah.
A lot of artists would saturate like these sort of like buses as well for things like that. But
yeah,
if you've got a kick which has got like a really aggressive click in the top of it, sort of around the 5 to 7K mark, and then you have a snare which has got an entire frequency range on that snare itself, you can sidechain to the hi-hats as well.
Okay. So
not aggressively, just enough so that it doesn't double up the transient frequency. Like if you've got hi-hats like really like smacking and they're very tappy, like very sort of aggressive close hi-hat, but then you've got a snare doing a very similar thing in the transient, you need them to not double up the transient because it's going to sound too clicky. Okay,
so you would sidechain. I get mixed up on the terminology. You would be cutting out the volume of the hi-hat for this to make space for the snare.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, kick and snare is paramount in
right.
Absolutely paramount. Well, you would sidechain kick and snare to everything basically.
Let's see. This is like a more full beat. One thing I realized recently. So I have a shaper box on this. This is an older project. I'm using this to actually shape the tail of the hi-hat. But there was another Metrik video. It was like, yeah, you gotta pay attention to latency with these like LFO tool and stuff like that. The latency is being added by other shit. I'm like, motherfucker, I didn't like. God damn it, why does that have to be more complicated?
Honestly, I would say don't bother listening to that sort of stuff just yet.
Okay.
That's when you start. That's like the advanced level stuff that's not essential, but you should pay attention to it at the right part of your career, if that makes sense. He knows a lot, and he's very good at what he does. But I think that when you're trying to basically find what your sound is, how your mixes work, all that sort of stuff, when you start dealing with like linear phases and Doppler phase cancellations, all this mad stuff, like you don't need to be going into that route just yet until you kind of perfected all the other bits. It's kind of like be a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember one of the first tutorials I watched back in like January when I started I was making like a Psytrance chiptune track that's on that new album, and that was like how to make a Psytrance low end, and this guy had like the tools to like with an oscilloscope to show like, so here's your kick, and then here's your bass. You need to make sure that they like connect into each other and they don't like have any phasing issues. And I'm sitting there like, okay, but this sounds exactly the same when you're playing it in isolation like this. I get why mechanically that makes sense. I'm just gonna make a normal track and we'll worry about that some other time.
No, and honestly, like people who make music that deal with that stuff and have really amazing mix downs, most people on the planet won't be able to hear it.
Yeah.
I promise you.
Some dude on a video recently was like, yeah, that wide bass you made sounds pretty cool, but it's going to suck in a club. And I'm like, bro, if this track's ever being played in a club, we're doing amazing things. This track's not going anywhere near a club. We don't need to worry about it.
The thing to know about clubs, though, is that I would say, like, clubs and festivals, probably about 60-70% of sound systems are mono. So, like, when you have something in stereo and you're not paying attention to the mono, then anything lost in mono is gone in clubs and festivals.
That's crazy. I guess it kind of makes sense because they are literally, you are in such a stereo field. The speakers are so literally far away from each other, and people are in such different places that any actual stereo mix would just make it so much more complicated that if you just put a mono signal through those two speakers, it will sound stereo-esque.
It will sound more seamless. The thing about stereo is that you can hear it, you can hear different phases when you move around the room. In terms, so if you're listening to a song and you move around the room, you'll slightly hear it change the phases around the room.
Yeah.
If you're listening to something in mono, you're hearing the signal. So if you play something in a festival where it's in a massive ground, a lot of guys who are really well versed in that sort of stuff will obviously tune systems so they don't sound so crazy and start stereo. But a lot of them don't want to deal with that sort of stuff and they just put it in mono. It just keeps sounding more seamless. There are a company called PK Sound which do a lot of the festivals for dubstep. They've got a sound system called Trinity, and they can literally direct sound using drivers. It's absolutely insane.
Whoa.
It's insane.
What would the application for that be when you've got like, you know, a crowd of thousands of people? Like, where would you point it?
I got a lot of friends in that space who do the sound for it, and honestly, they sound like scientists when they explain it. So, like, I know a lot about music and stuff. But when they explain it, I'm like,
That's wild. Nope, too long.
See how that almost doesn't make a difference?
Yeah, I can hear it, like, it creates like a snap, but it's actually not cutting out the, I think it's because the smoothing is on, maybe?
Yeah, but when you listen to that in a mix, you won't notice it dipping.
No.
If you can hear it here when it's soloed, just barely, you definitely won't hear it when it's soloed, when it's everything on. But
so would you make it... Now I can hear it. Sounds bad.
I'd probably add a nice curve to it, but...
So do like... have it come out a little earlier there, and then if we do like turn this to that, now it's a curve. There we go.
See?
Yeah.
And it's almost creating a funk in the hi-hats itself as well, you know. So,
yeah. And then when you bring the snare back in, there's actually more space for.
You almost won't notice, but transient.
But the speakers will notice.
Transient will be yeah. But I mean, people will notice when you start boosting this up much louder into masters and that sort of stuff, and the transients start getting a bit more accentuated, you'll definitely know.
One thing I had on a previous project, maybe this is a problem that I just need to solve before we get to this like I shouldn't end up in this situation, but I had a problem where like I made a whole track, it sounded great, I loved the volume of everything, one section notably way louder in like true peak and luffs in every way than everything else. It wasn't because of the way it ramped into it to my ear, it didn't feel bad as I was mixing, but when I got there, this one section super loud in comparison to everything else, and it made like mixing a bitch, especially when trying to like prepare it for like Spotify and the places that are gonna like really turn it down if like one section's way too louder than the other. Like, what do you do when one section's way louder than the other sections? Do you like bring up the others?
I guess I have questions based on why it was louder. So like, for instance, you mix quite loud in headphones.
I try not to like. I'm not like hurting my ears. I'm missing like at a full where it feels full.
I mean, like if you're cranking it in headphones and you start getting like what's it called? When you get tired,
you
get ear. What's it called?
Fatigue.
Oh my god, I've just completely gone blank. Yeah, ear fatigue. When you start getting ear fatigue, things can then appear in different volumes when they're not. Otherwise, what I would normally do is so whenever I'm making my sessions, I bus everything. Everything gets put in a bus. You've got intro stuff, effects pads, effects notes, like vocals, hi-hats, tops, cymbals, snares, kicks, like everything gets put in a bus, and then you can level it from there. But a lot of the time, if I've got a lot of elements in like just the intro, which are elements that I've already kind of pre-EQ'd and sorted out in the channels, and I don't need to touch them in the bus. I can just put them into a bus, and then I can just level the entire intro.
I see.
By itself, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I was kind of doing that through a really shitty way with modulating. Oh, is it not here? I swear I was.
Were you like automating the master or something?
I swear I was automating the master volume. Maybe I didn't on this particular version of this project, but
I would say there's nothing wrong with that, honestly. If that's because if you listen to a lot of tracks, especially in the older days of DnB, you'll get quiet intros and then more impactful, louder drops.
Okay.
Wilkinson actually still does it now, but there's nothing wrong with having a quieter intro to a more impactful drop. It's just that sometimes you can lose energy if you have something a bit quieter, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
so if you're trying to set the tone with an intro, then it can't be too quiet, obviously, because it's going to be night and day when it comes to, the drop's impactful, but it's going to be a bit too much when the drop happens, you know? So you have to find that.
There, I can play this for you. This is that Psytrance chiptune track, and it's got like I'll play kind of like from the section before into the section that gets super loud. And I know part of it is that I think that I'm having the kick doubling like crazy like that is really sending the luffs up. Like having that like low frequency doubling in speed. But
I would say this might be a case of you just having to close your eyes and listen rather than look at luffs and stuff. What do you have in your master, for instance?
I don't think there's anything on the master actually. An EQ cutting off the lows and highs, a limiter, another EQ doing more highs, and the multimeter and the level meter, which are just monitoring. So actually nothing.
I would say put your second EQ, put that after the limiter should be last.
Okay.
Because the limiter is going to be doing a lot of the work anyway. So that limiter, for instance, if it gets too crazy, we'll already be removing a lot of the too craziness. If the LUFs are telling you there's too much going on, when you bounce it, the waveform's going to be flat anyway. So
yeah.
It should be fine, honestly. I think it's just a case of just listen to it and see if it's fine, rather than, because we can look at numbers and graphs and everything and not get the proper context of the track.
Yeah,
Because music is listening, isn't it?
100%.
We're not watching music, So I think maybe in this situation, if it's too back and forth with your decision on what you want to do, I would say just close your eyes and listen to it, and if it sounds good, it sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. That's encouraging. I think that was kind of how I ended up in that situation. Though, was like I'm just like listening as I'm making the track. They get done and be like, okay, cool, it's good. Now let's look at levels and be like, what the fuck? Why is this all over the place? And yeah, I guess this section is. I mean, you are obviously even just like looking at it, you can see like how much more shit's kind of going on in this section than in like any other section in the track. So there is just more layers, and I was definitely in kind of a maximalist like. It doesn't have enough energy. Add more, and that created more issues. But
I've just noticed there you've got like, is it like 6 stabby sims? Oh, 5. So there's 5 stabby sims. You could just grab all of them together and then just move them down by like a dB or something on the mixer.
So this is what I was doing with those. I was constantly trying to like pull them down to make space for the risers that were coming in that were making, because I wanted those to like really take over the space. And these are all also different sounds, kind of doing the same MIDI data. I just dragged the section over each one, so it didn't change the title.
They're doing the same thing, right?
So like these two are going. And then these two are like, so a different sound, but yeah, same idea.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I would say maybe just turn that as a whole, turn them down by a dB or maybe slightly less than that, just so that it will still give it a lot of energy, because there's quite a lot of things going on. 5 channels adding on is quite a lot of things to do. So
yeah,
if you're worried about that level right there, I would say just grab all those 5 bits, because those are the things that are contributing, because everything else is still playing as I can see. As normal. Yeah,
the drums are all going up there. But yeah, it's funny because like it started at like, what is this? +3 there? No, that's +3 is the top,
right?
Plus
3.8, 3.8, and then it goes
down to
and maxes out
to +2, and then and then over here we actually have to go all the way down to -4s and -9s depending on the sound. So it was starting to pull down, and it was still like creating so much space there. I also didn't even own like shaper box and like have any like I wasn't making space for the drums. Everything's laying directly on top of the drums. There was a lot of problems with this track, but
you've got your kick sidechained in this as well.
I don't think I really do. Let me look. So my bass is up here.
This kind of song, it being a bit more like dancey, like really awesome dancey. This is something that you would typically have the kick be a lot more forefront to, and create the funk in the track. So you could probably just bust everything together and then sidechain the kick to all the bases.
I don't think I was aware of that at the time, but like it's one of those lessons I've learned since then. I'm like, yes, I would absolutely do that. I don't think I have on any of these any sidechain compression, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, honestly, just I'd say create a bus, put all of your synths in one bus, and then just sidechain the kick to the bus.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
You don't need to do it separately. There's no point.
Makes sense.
You just want the same rhythm, doing the same thing to everything. So.
Yeah, especially with it being like psytrance, where you want that's what's most important.
The reason it's not going and it's going is because it's the sidechain effect.
Well, it's the effect. I just did it with a MIDI instead of actually.
Exactly. So what you're doing in MIDI is you're effectively creating a sidechain effect. So you want to do that same thing to everything. So I would bust everything together.
Okay.
And just do it from that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I might go back and remaster this and do a fun. Mastering feels kind of like bullshit. Am I stupid?
Mastering, there's 2 ways to look at it. I would say you can do a gentle mastering. I think mixing down is basically mastering these days.
Okay.
Mastering was a tool for vinyl.
Right. Okay.
The reason you would master is because vinyl takes a certain amount of criteria for it to be able to be pressed onto plastic, basically onto wax. So you couldn't have it be too loud. You couldn't have you want it as clean as possible, so that the lines would groove into the wax as clean as possible. So there was a lot of criteria for mastering. I think mastering these days, you can do it. I don't think it's necessary if you know how to mix
Okay.
a song.
Okay.
You're effectively mastering it in general.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. Felt to me, especially with working with electronic music and with MIDI and synths, where you're not like tracking, not like recording a bunch of people performing and then going through and mixing after you do the recordings. I was like, I feel like I'm mixing and mastering the whole time, but then you go watch, YouTube University. They're like, oh, here's what you got to do with mastering, and I'd be like, and they're like, here's A and B, and I'm like, that's the same exact fucking goddamn sound. What do you mean? You didn't do anything to this thing,
Mastering is like, it's just making sure it's limited so that it doesn't encroach zero. But then a lot of artists don't care about that stuff these days. It's like making it cleaner. It's just making it cleaner, but you do that in the mix anyway. So it's like, I don't know, it's weird. Mastering it typically was for vinyl, but now these days it's kind of changed the notion of what it means.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so we are kind of doing the mixing and mastering as we're going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This was super helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was really fun.
Cool. Anytime.
And that's it. That's all we had time for, folks. If you enjoyed this video, please go give some FuntCase some love. His music is everywhere. It's fantastic. He didn't pay me to say any of this. He actually didn't charge me anything either to sit there and record for like an hour with him. It was a fantastic time. I enjoyed it, and I hope you guys benefited from it as well. Boss Fight is out everywhere. If you enjoy chiptune music, my new album, you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, everywhere that people listen to music. Please go give it some love. And also, hit the subscribe button if you got anything out of this. Just do it. It's not that hard. Love you guys. See you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.